How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I am another host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis.
Hey, Todd.
Yes, you are.
Hey, Gary. Happy Halloween, guys.
Hey, guys.
Is it Halloween time already?
It is Halloween is upon us. So this week on this episode of the show, we're going to do something a little bit different. Normally, we just ended our John Waters series. Normally, after we end a long series like that, we do a little roulette episode, where we pick up a movie at random. We're not doing that this week. This is going to be a special episode. It's not part of a longer series. It's not a roulette episode. We're going to I'm kind of considering this the Cinema Shock Halloween special. So this is our very own Treehouse of Horror.
How fun!
So what I would consider Cinema Shock to be a film history podcast. Would you agree with that? Although it is one that primarily focuses on, as Gary's intro says, cult and genre films. And while this is not primarily a horror podcast, it's actually been a while since we've talked about a horror movie, hasn't it?
I think the last one was probably, you could consider Stepfather. That was back in July.
Yeah, that's horror adjacent.
Drag Me to Hell we did back in January.
Yeah, so it's been like 10 months and we or at least what was July, 3 months ago?
Yeah.
So yeah, The Stepfather I guess you could put as a horror film, but Drag Me to Hell, all the Sam Raimi stuff obviously is, but I still think it's safe to say, even because we reference horror a lot, even though we're not a horror movie podcast per se.
Right.
So I think it's safe to say that horror is probably our favorite genre. Well, for at least two of us. One of us is not a horror guy, I think.
Yeah,
right?
Gary.
No, man, I've been sitting around thinking, do I have to start my own horror podcast to talk about a horror movie again?
It's been a while. We're getting to a John Carpenter series one of these years. We'll get to it at some point eventually. That's just a monumental career to tackle. So
That's true.
But anyway, over the years, we have touched on some foundational horror films, those types of movies that change the genre forever. Your Night of the Living Dead, first episode ever on this podcast, Night of the Living Dead. We've done Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Alien. We've done a lot of what people would consider essential building blocks of the horror genre. But the movie we're discussing today is quite literally one of the foundations of the genre, a film that shaped the very fabric of the horror genre and has done so for over a century. Today, we are talking about F.W. Murnau's seminal vampire film, Nosferatu. Gary, I'm going to be very impressed if you are able to find a trailer that has dialogue to put
Just gonna, in a world where nobody can hear me.
All right. Wherefrom there is no spoiler, except that a woman without sin should cause the vampire to forget the first cock. Excuse me. Sorry. Crow. The first cock crow.
Never forget the first cock.
Yeah.
How you couldn't.
No. That'll stick with you.
Yeah.
And it should be pointed out that while we have touched on a lot of horror movies, we've never touched on a horror movie without consent. So
Wow.
I'm proud of us, guys.
Writer comedian Todd A. Davis.
Yep.
I don't think you get to like. I feel like that should just be natural, Todd. Like you don't get to be proud of yourself that you've never touched one without consent. That's expected.
Yeah,
that's
true.
Baseline. What you
bottom
should do.
line.
No, I'm saying we do. I can't speak for other podcasts out there. I don't know what they've put out or how they've conducted themselves, but we always do it with consent.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for specifying that.
Yeah, no problem. Available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events.
Well, released in 1922, Nosferatu is one of the earliest examples of a horror film, but it certainly is not the first. Horror has been part of the movies practically since the medium was invented, with the pioneering cinematic magician George Méliès directing a film called House of the Devil in 1896. If you guys haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. Maybe we'll throw it up on Instagram or something. It's only 4 minutes long, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, hey, this is 1896. They weren't making cinematic big epics quite yet.
Yeah. They were for our times. They get it done TikTok style.
Right.
Nice.
Wearing it out. You get the point.
Well, Nosferatu, in fact, is not even technically the first vampire movie. There were two other unauthorized adaptations of Bram Stoker's Dracula. They were released in the 2 years before Nosferatu. One was made in Russia and one in Hungary, although both of them have been lost to history, making Nosferatu the oldest surviving vampire film, even if its survival was not always certain.
You know, vampires have been around before that, and like movies, like you said, like not even just Dracula. Like there was a film called The Vampire in 1913, directed by Robert Vignola. But the vampires then were not like blood-sucking, living dead things. These vamps, they were like female seductresses.
Right.
In a lot of these things. I think that particular one was based on a poem or inspired by a poem by Rudyard Kipling called The Vampire. And
yeah, I mean, even Bram Stoker's Dracula was not like the first piece of fiction to involve vampires. I mean, it obviously was it became the most well-known one, but he was drawing on literature that came out before he was born. When he wrote Dracula, Wow. Obviously he popularized it, although Dracula was not like a huge bestseller when it came out. But we don't have time to get into the history of Bram Stoker's Dracula, or we'll never get through this episode.
I just thought it was a fun fact, just
an
interesting thing to know that there were vamps before Dracula out there.
Absolutely. And, although it wasn't a financial success during its initial release, Nosferatu has gone on to become known as one of the most important films of all time, not just horror films, but just one of the most important films of all time, a key moment in the history of not only horror, but of cinema itself. And Nosferatu's journey to the screen began during World War I, when a German soldier by the name of Albin Grau, who we will talk more about here in a second, but he was told a story by a Serbian farmer one night as they sat around a campfire. The story told was that the farmer's father had been transformed into a vampire
before this wretched war. It sounds like Schwarzenegger. Sorry.
He is Austrian, so it's pretty close.
You want to just do Schwarzenegger? All right, here we go. Before this war, I was over in Romania. You can laugh about this superstition, but I swear on the Mother of God that I myself knew that horrible thing of seeing an undead. Yes, an undead, or Nosferatu, as vampires are known over there. Only in books have you heard those strange and disturbing creatures spoken about, and you smile at these old wives' tales. But it's here, where we're at in the Balkans, that one finds the cradle of those vampires. We've been pursued and tormented by those monsters forever.
There's something about it being an Arnold Schwarzenegger accent that makes it sound much less scary than, let's say, if it were a Werner Herzog. Like if Werner Herzog were doing that, we've been pursued and tormented. Like he's very, intense and quiet, that quiet intensity and Schwarzenegger just sounds like a goob. So that story would have been, Imagine what Todd just did, but in a Werner Herzog, only good, but being told around a campfire in the middle of a war. Like
I was literally thinking the same thing. Yeah,
around
That would
the
be
fire.
scary, but if it's just Arnold over there telling the story. Now, it is highly likely that this story was a complete fabrication made up by Grau during the promotion of Nosferatu, but it still makes for a pretty good story. And according to Grau, that story that he was told set him on the path to create a film about a vampire.
That film, by the way, it's called a Serbian film, and you can find that streaming right now, and you should check it out immediately.
Or not, from what I've heard. I've never seen it. I've never seen it. Everyone tells me not to, but you know
That's
what?
how I am too.
But you know what? When people tell me not to, that's just like we talk about this on the show all the time, Gary. When someone tries to censor a film, it makes you more curious about it. And because everyone tells me not to watch a Serbian film, that 100% guarantees that I am going to watch that movie.
Exactly.
That's just how it works. I got to see what you're talking about. Anyway, in the aftermath of World War I, Germany was in shambles and its economy was collapsing. And along with that came the collapse of traditional values, which led to the country's avant-garde arts movement kind of exploding, including expressionistic painting, whose visual style would have a huge impact on German cinema. This post-war period also led to a major occult revival in Germany, of which Albin Grau, who was a lifelong occultist, was a leading figure. See, by the 1920s, Albin Grau had become associated with Germany's most influential occultist guru, a guy named Heinrich Trenker, who had cobbled together his own religion of sorts called Pansophy, using facets of theosophy, Freemasonry, and other kind of esoteric magical systems. And then in 1921, Trenker was approached by the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, and he was asked to join, and he would actually later become the OTO Grand Master of Germany, which led him to entering a correspondence with the OTO's most famous member, the Grand Master of the US and the UK, a guy by the name of Aleister Crowley, whom the British press dubbed the most evil man alive, the great beast Aleister Crowley, the most famous Satanist like of all time, basically.
Black Sabbath has that song, right? Like,
Mr. Crowley, yeah.
Mr. Crowley.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's who they're talking about. So there's a lot more history here. I'm not going to get into that because this isn't a podcast about the OTO, and we could talk for 2 hours about all of this stuff because it's incredibly interesting. But that organization would later split. Crowley essentially assumed control of the organization. He basically committed a coup, took over it, and made his own self-created occult system, Thelema, their guiding philosophy.
Yeah, seriously though, it gets intense. Like the more you read about it, like Grau,
It's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, he's like a lifelong student of this Fraternitas Saturni, and they
Nailed
call
it.
him. Yeah, I'm sure that was right. They named him like Master Pacatius, and he ends up kind of leading the thing until there's the Veda conference, and Crowley and Tronker kind of split off, and there's a huge, like, sounds like warlock civil war.
It's basically a civil war, and Albin Grau sided with Heinrich Trenker, who was his sort of mentor in this. So basically they split, and he chose sides, and he didn't choose Aleister Crowley's side.
Yeah, kind of badass. And
It's
since
pretty
we're not
cool.
even gonna, since we're not gonna discuss it here, according to some sources too, like he ends up like going in like World War II, he ends up dying in a concentration camp, and then there's stories about him not actually dying, that he like fought his way out and escaped, and then he ended up surviving in Sweden until like the 70s or something like that.
I read that he escaped to Sweden during the war because obviously he was I think Albin Grau Jewish? I can't remember. I've got it in my notes somewhere, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, that's what I read, that he fled Germany during the war before the Nazis, while the Nazis were rising to power.
But yeah, that's what you get when you're a fucking warlock or some shit,
right?
You get all kinds of legends about you.
Yeah,
I mean the appeal.
And the reason I bring this stuff up for a couple of reasons. One, it's fucking cool. It's a cool fucking story, right? That one of the guys who brought Nosferatu to life was like a legit occultist, right? But also the second reason is when he began to develop this film that was, inspired by this vampire story, supposedly, Albin Grau, along with a producer named Enrico Diekmann, formed a production company called Prana Film with the sole intention of creating films that dealt with the occult and the supernatural. And also another reason is Grau, he really instilled the film with a lot of mystical undertones that were informed by his studies of the occult. So because in addition to spearheading the creation of the film, Albin Grau also served as its main visual stylist and production designer. And many of his designs incorporated occult symbolism. You see it in the film, the most obvious of which is this real estate contract that Orlok and Knock exchange. It's because there's a close-up of it in the film, and you see that it's filled with all this hermetic and alchemical symbols and words written in like the Enochian language and all kinds of other stuff that's closely associated with the occult. There are other instances as well, but most of them are kind of in the background. Like there's one up on the wall at one point towards the beginning of the film. But that real estate contract, I mean, they really like zoom in on that, so you can see it pretty clearly.
I have a question about something you mentioned, Albin Grau also serving as the main visual stylist, the production designer for the film.
Yeah.
Like films of this period, I mean, when we watch the credits, there's a handful of people that they list. I'm sure a lot of people that worked on it didn't get listed in the credits, but were people generally pulling double duty, and was it more of a skeleton crew with, films of this era?
I don't really know. I don't know enough about the production of a lot of silent films to be able to really answer that question. What I do know is that Nosferatu was a pretty low budget movie, even for the time, even for silent films. It was pretty tightly budgeted, so that may have had something to do with it. Albin Grau, though, he is credited as I think in the credits it's either production designer or art director or something along those lines.
Right.
But he did serve in a bigger role. I mean, he is the one who got the film made. He hired the director, he hired the writer. He essentially, even though he's not listed as such in the credits, but he is the producer of this film.
Right.
He's the boss, basically.
Nice.
And I don't know how common that was or if it was unique to this because of his background. He created, I'm going to post this stuff on our Instagram and things like that, but he created posters for this. He created, essentially, they didn't call them this, but storyboards. He created illustrations of scenes in the movie that were recreated on film almost exactly as he drew them.
Wow.
He created the look of the vampire. He was one of the auteurs of this film, without a doubt.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So once it was decided that Prana Films' first project would be a vampire story, Diekman and Grau, they hired a writer named Henrik Galeen to write a screenplay based on Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, despite the fact that Prana never obtained the rights to adapt Dracula into a film, a fact that will come to haunt them down the line. So Henrik Galeen, like many others in this story, was a very influential figure in Germany's expressionistic period during the silent era. Not much is known of his early life, but in the years before the First World War, he became an assistant to Max Reinhardt, who was a leading figure in Germany's theater scene. Now, without going down too deep of a rabbit hole, Max Reinhardt's influence on Nosferatu it cannot be understated. Even though he had no hand in the film's creation, he is not involved in the creation of Nosferatu at all. But Reinhardt, he was an actor, a theater director, and a theatrical producer who is considered one of the German stage's most prominent figures of this time. He was a big deal. He was famous. He was a leading figure in the German theater. Later in life, he would actually become an acting teacher for the likes of Marlene Dietrich, and even Clint Eastwood studied under him. Wow. But he has connections to nearly everyone involved in Nosferatu's production, from its main actors to its director. It's wild. It's you could play 2 degrees of Max Reinhardt in this with almost all of the main figures in Nosferatu. So Henrik Galeen, he began his career as an actor, but by the time he was hired to write Nosferatu, he'd been writing screenplays for nearly a decade. In 1914, he wrote, directed, and acted in, or I should say co-directed, and acted in a film called The Golem, which is the first of several depictions of the figure from Jewish folklore. While this version of The Golem is lost, it's lost to history. Another version, which is widely available even today, you could probably find it on YouTube right now if you wanted to, was released in 1920, and that was also written by Galeen. In writing Nosferatu, Galene made several changes from Bram Stoker's novel, including, of course, all the characters' names. All the characters' names are different. And he changed or removed several plot points from the book, although the final product is still very easily recognizable as a telling of the Dracula story.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who's read Dracula or seen any adaptation of Dracula will have no issues recognizing that that's what this is, even if you didn't know ahead of time.
I don't think we're going to mention it. It's just kind of sad when you read about Galene too, that like he apparently had to flee Germany.
Mm-hmm. A lot of folks involved in this did.
Yeah, and then I think he came to America, but rather than finding any success over here, I think he just was kind of faded into obscurity instead. It was just kind of a bummer considering.
I mean, considering what he had contributed. Well, once his screenplay was completed, all Grau needed was a director, and he turned to a guy named F.W. Murnau, who he'd met during the production of Murnau's film Journey into the Night in 1920. Galene had worked as an illustrator on that. I think he created some of like the promotional posters and things like that. He had seen Murnau work and really liked his style and thought he would be a good fit for this. So he approached him about directing what would become Nosferatu. So F.W. Murnau was born Friedrich Wilhelm Plumpe in 1888. He was born into a well-to-do family. Murnau was a precocious kid. That seems to be a running thing with a lot of these directors.
Yeah.
Who was naturally drawn to the arts, much to his father's chagrin. His father did not want him becoming like an actor or involved in the arts in any way. I think he wanted him to be a doctor or something, that old story. But even as a child, he was drawn to performance, and he put on puppet shows for friends and family, which is something else that keeps coming up. Like John Waters, Alejandro Jodorowsky, like all these guys are put on puppet shows when they were kids.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts. And for, I guess it was this theater interest and I mean the rumored situation of him being a homosexual that like I think
it wasn't rumored. He was
pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it was not rumored. He was
people saw him fucking dudes.
Yeah, I mean he was pretty open about his sexuality. As open as you could be in 1920s.
I was gonna say because
Germany.
like everything I read acted like he was kind of like still kind of keeping that under wraps a little bit. But
among his like people he knew that he was close to, it was an open secret, let's say.
Yeah, well, his family was not cool with that, so that's how he ended up changing that name. If anybody's wondering.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was basically came to a falling out with his father, and I don't think he ended up ever speaking to his father again after a certain point. And the name Murnau came from a place that he would like a place where he would go camping and stuff. It was another little, I don't know if it was an actual town or a community or whatever, but he took the name from this place where he felt he would go with his friend Hans, who was his lifelong friend. Hans is also known. Most scholars consider him to be basically the love of F.W. Murnau's life. He was his lover, and Hans was unfortunately killed during the war. And I don't think F.W. Murnau really ever got over that.
Wow, this is a real bummer of a story.
Yeah.
All of this kind of making me sad here.
Yeah, there are sad moments to F.W. Murnau's story, but before all that, in college, he studied art history, which his father also did not like. He was also very involved in the university's theater program. And it was there, working in the theater program, where he would act out in plays and stuff in the university. It was there that he caught the attention of a prominent theater director named Max Reinhardt.
Oh, we've heard of him.
Yeah. So Reinhardt invited Murnau to attend his acting school, which is that's like a big deal to be invited to this guy's acting school. So he must have been really good. But World War I put a bit of a hold on Murnau's promising career as an actor.
Yeah, it ruined a lot of weekends.
Yeah, so at the start of the war, Murnau enlisted and he served in the German army, soon was promoted to officer, and would eventually join the Imperial German Flying Corps, where he spent 2 years flying missions in northern France. These were not like bombing missions. He did reconnaissance missions, and he survived 8 crashes during the war without ever sustaining any severe injuries.
Jeez.
Not real good at recon. Get us a closer look, Murnau. Not that close. Not that close.
You wanted me to bring the plane back. Oh, sorry. That was not in the mission brief.
The last of these crashes, and a lot of people speculate that this last crash was on purpose. Like a lot of people speculate that this was him sort of quietly defecting. It landed him in Switzerland, and in Switzerland he was arrested and he was in prison for the remainder of the war. But this imprisonment seemed kind of nice. Like it seemed like it pretty chill because they let him continue to act and put on plays in prison. Like he started a theater troupe in prison. And at one point, the Swiss government launched a competition for the best production of a drama called Marignano, which is this sort of like national production of Switzerland. So they held this contest to see who would put on the best version of this play. And the inmates at the internment camp where he was imprisoned were eligible to compete. And Murnau's production won first prize in all of Switzerland while in prison.
Jeez.
Yeah. So he also started writing screenplays while in prison. This is where he first started working on screenplays for film.
So just as a quick little side note, talking about inmates acting in plays, did either of you guys happen to see the 2005 documentary Shakespeare Behind Bars?
I did not, but I have heard the This American Life story that inspired it.
I had a copy of it. It is really fascinating.
Yeah, I would like to see it because that story is really cool.
Yeah, just real briefly, the big kind of hook for it is they put on a play and everyone was cast based on the crimes that led them to be in that prison. It is a fascinating look at life behind bars and these individuals with, troubled pasts, putting themselves into something and making something beautiful. It's a really fascinating story. Highly, highly recommend it.
I, for one, am fascinated with that. Just the connection again to one of our previous series with John Waters and female trouble. And, obviously, Mr. Waters would have been getting right along with Murnau, I feel like, maybe for lots of reasons. But, this time I was just thinking about the prison thing. They both, maybe they'd have met in prison.
Well, after the war, Murnau returned to Germany and founded an independent production company with the actor Conrad Veidt. Conrad Veidt, very famous German actor of the time. He's in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is probably the most well-known thing that he's known for now. Mm-hmm. But their first production, Murnau's directorial debut, was called The Boy in Blue, released in 1919. So for the next couple of years, Murnau would direct 10 films, several of which were supernaturally tinged, such as there's one called Satanus. The Head of Janus was one of them, which was an unauthorized adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and The Haunted Castle, which I assume is about a haunted castle. But by the time he was hired for Nosferatu, he had already established himself as an experienced and well-regarded director in Germany.
This was not Murnau's first ripoff. In 1920, he lifted that Jekyll and Hyde story.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, it was ripping off Dracula was not like his idea. In fact, I don't know that he was aware that it was unauthorized when he was filming it. Because some of the reading I've done indicated that even Heinrich Galeen, who the screenwriter, was under the impression that Prana Film had obtained the rights to do this. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say who knew what. I mean, obviously, Albin Grau knew that they had not obtained the rights to it.
Grau.
All right, so we've got a director on board. We've got our screenplay. We're ready to roll on this, but we've got to have a cast, right? Mm-hmm. So in the role of Thomas Hutter, which is the character who it's Jonathan Harker from the novel. That's that version, the Keanu Reeves character.
Okay.
Keanu Reeves character. Murnau cast an actor named Gustav von Wangenheim, who was another student of Max Reinhardt. Ellen Hutter, which is the film stand-in for Mina, that's Winona Ryder's character, by the way.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is played by Greta Schroeder, who was married to film director Paul Wegener, who was he was a big director in the German Expressionism movement. He directed that 1920 version of The Golem that we mentioned earlier, which Schroeder also appeared in. Well, the film's Renfield figure, Knock, or I heard one Nosferatu scholar, I guess you'd call him Canuck, which maybe is a German pronunciation. I don't know.
You kept saying that during our live show, but I refused to accept it.
But these guys know a lot more about Nosferatu than I do, so I assume that their pronunciation is correct. So Canuck is what we can go with. So anyway, he was played by an actor named Alexander Grenache. Grenache had, you might be surprised to know, been a student of Max Reinhardt. Nosferatu's version of Van Helsing is a character named Professor Bulwer, played by Jonathan Gottout. How would you say that, Gary? How would you say that name?
I think you got it.
Gottout? Sure. Gottout.
See, I would probably
Get
go
out. Got out.
Get out.
How would you say it, Todd?
I was gonna go longer on the O's, so like goat.
Goat. That sounds
Goat.
worse. I don't know. We're probably all wrong.
Yes.
But Gottout had also worked with Paul Wegner, and yes, he worked for Max Reinhardt in his years as a character actor on the German stage. So what are we up to, like 5 people or something so far that have worked with this guy?
He was the brother-in-law of Galeen. Did you say that already?
No, I did not. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, he was the brother-in-law of Henrik Galeen.
How about that? Wow. Small world. Small Germany.
Look at that. Yeah.
And of course, in the role of Count Orlok, or Graf Orlok himself, was the unforgettable Max Schreck. Now, there have been many rumors about Max Schreck over the years. One is that he didn't actually exist and that Max Schreck was a pseudonym for another actor. And the fact that Schreck's last name translates to like terror, the word terror, his name is Max Terror, that probably helped fuel this rumor. It sounds like a stage name, right? But it's not. It was yeah. The most famous and ludicrous rumor was that Schreck was, in fact, an actual vampire that Murnau had found during his travels in the Carpathian Mountains. Which of course,
but we all know he's really just a harmless ogre who lives in the forest.
Of course, that rumor inspired Shadow of the Vampire later on, which is a movie about the filming of Nosferatu, where Max Schreck is an actual vampire. But this story, of course, is bullshit. Like Max Schreck has a long, well-documented history as an actor, but before and after Nosferatu, and he, like all actors of this time period, began his career on stage. Guess whose theater troupe he was a member of?
I'm thinking somebody from the Actors Studio.
Yeah, you want to guess which one?
It's Max. So many.
It's Max Reinhardt. Max fucking Reinhardt. Another one.
Oh, look at that.
All right.
Now, I was only halfway joking about it, by the way, walking through the forest. That was apparently a big hobby of his.
Well, yeah, he was. The thing is, like, Max Schreck was kind of a weird dude.
Yeah.
Like he was kind of a weird dude, and he played a lot of weird characters throughout his career, none as weird as this one, but he was kind of known to be like kind of standoffish and just kind of an oddball guy, which led to him being able to play darker characters very, very well.
Like Lana Del Rey.
Yeah, I hear a lot of comparisons between Lana Del Rey and Max Schreck, actually.
I will say that his wife was named Fanny, so Fanny Schreck.
Fanny Terror.
So he's got a lot on his own.
Do not Google Fanny Terror.
I'm just saying, you don't need to make up stories about this guy. He's got plenty all on his own. By the way, still super famous now, especially after our live show on Nosferatu. I've learned this even more. Super, super popular character actor because of SpongeBob SquarePants.
Right. Yes. Yeah. he has appeared if only he could get residuals for that.
Right.
Well, Todd.
Yes.
This is normally the part where we ask about Star Trek, but
yeah,
considering that this movie came out 40 some odd years before Star Trek debuted, I'm going to guess this is a swing and a miss right here.
It's most of the actors were long dead, actually, like at least a decade or two, most of them 3 or 4 decades before Gene Roddenberry's Vision of the Future would debut in 1966. But I did see that Greta Schroeder, who plays Ellen, lived to 1980, so she could have been in Star Trek had she not stopped working in 1954.
Oh, good. So she at least could have watched Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly.
And Star Wars.
Yeah. So there's nobody in Star Trek.
Nope, I mean,
she might have. That's too bad.
Yeah.
They'd escape the Nazis and get to see the peaceful future.
Would have been kind of cool to see her like pop up in the Salt Vampire episode of the original series. That would have been fun.
Yeah, or to meet Jean-Luc Picard, who looks like Nosferatu. Like looks
Yeah.
like Count Orlok.
That is disrespectful to Sir Patrick Stewart. Disrespectful. So filming on Nosferatu began in the summer of 1921 with Fritz Arno Wagner as the Wagner. I guess it's Wagner. I'm not used to saying my W's.
Wagner.
Wagner, yeah,
Wagner as the shoot's cameraman. So Wagner would become known as one of Germany's most acclaimed cinematographers of this period, specializing in the type of dark, moody lighting that characterized the Expressionist movement. He had previously worked with Murnau on The Haunted Castle and The Burning Soil, and he would also work with Fritz Lang on 4 features, including M, which is one of my all-time favorite movies if you haven't seen it, and The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which is another really fantastic film.
I saw that Fritz Lang actually spoke at his funeral later too, so that makes sense. I did not catch that, but that's interesting.
Yeah, they worked together quite a bit.
Did he work? Did he work on Metropolis?
I don't think he worked on Metropolis. He worked a little bit later because like M was Fritz Lang's, or Fritz Lang, I think is the actual pronunciation, but M is his first sound film. So I think he worked on it like later on in Fritz Lang's career, maybe even after he came to America. But well, yeah, M is still in German. So, but it was still later on.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, and a spoiler alert, Murnau dies.
Yeah, yes, he does. He is not 150 years old. So, well, the shoot began with location photography in the town of Lübeck, which provided several. I wanted to say Lubbock. Well, that's a town in Texas, though. They did not film this in Lubbock.
Let's go to Luckenbach, Germany.
But Lübeck provided several important exterior locations, including Hutter's house and the sinister-looking building across the way that will catch the eye of Count Orlok. This building was actually a salt storehouse. Built to store salt that was mined nearby, and then it would be like carted off to other places. And it actually is still there. That building is still there and still looks pretty much exactly the same as it did then.
Wow.
Yeah. By the way, there's a lot. We're going to mention several shooting locations, but there's a lot of location photography in this, which is highly unusual for silent films in Germany at this time. Most films were shot on sets. Now that was actually a budgetary thing. Like I mentioned before, this was a low budget film, so it was cheaper to shoot on location than to build sets specifically for the film. I mean, they did build sets, which we'll get to, but they didn't build as many as a lot of productions at this time would have.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention that in a minute, that you know, it's kind of cool that like most of German expressionist films especially are like known for like highly stylized sets and that sort of thing,
especially like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is the biggest example of that, where the sets are highly stylized, the way that they're painted, the way they're constructed. It's completely unnatural, completely like askew, and that is like kind of the ultimate German expressionist film, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then so that's what they're known as. So this was like kind of unique that Murnau is doing all this like outdoor photography with everything.
Yeah, I mean, Murnau is. I don't think Murnau would be considered an expressionist filmmaker. I think that there is definitely a lot of expressionism in Nosferatu specifically, but not in necessarily in his other films. He's much more of the like German romanticism kind of aesthetic, but but the influence of Albin Grau does come through in some of the expressionistic touches in this film, especially in some of the indoor scenes, like the scene with Canuck where he's on his chair when we first meet him. He's on this chair that's like way too tall on a table that's way too tall. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. And that comes directly from an Albin Grau illustration. So like moments like that are very expressionistic, and there are a lot of interior moments that are. And I would consider Nosferatu an expressionist film probably, but I would not consider F.W. Murnau an expressionist filmaker.
You know, so it was by accident that he was doing this, or no? I mean,
I don't think it was necessarily by accident. Yeah, he's doing what's right for this story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But he doesn't feel the need to do that with every story. Like some of the only other one of his I've seen bits and pieces of Faust, but I've seen Sunrise, which we'll talk about later on. But that movie is not remotely expressionist. So they moved from Lubeck to a town called Wismar, which is a port town where the iconic image of the death ship Silent Glide into town is filmed. One of the most haunting images in the entire film was filmed there in Wismar. From there, the production moved to Prague and Poprad before moving on to their most atmospheric location, which was the semi-ruined castle of Oravsky Podzemok, which serves as the exterior of Orlok's lair in the film. It's a insane looking location, honestly.
Yeah.
And during these outdoor scenes, people from the nearby village, they would often visit the shoot. These people there in the Czech Republic, they would visit and they would kind of offer to clean up things around set, do little kind of menial tasks around the set, hoping to get paid a little bit of extra money for helping out. But none of these people would go anywhere near Max Schreck because they were terrified by his appearance, even in broad daylight.
He looks pretty fucking great. So
he does. He looks great. And I'm not entirely sure who did like the makeup effects on it. I know it was designed by Albin Grau. I don't know if Albin Grau applied it or not, I couldn't find any documentation that said who was responsible for it. But one thing that I did notice, because I've, over the last couple of weeks, I've watched this like 4 times, I think. There's a thing with his hands.
Yeah.
With Count Orlok's hands, where his fingers get longer as the movie goes on and more claw-like. So in like the earlier scenes, like where he's got his little hat on and he's sort of trying to pass for like a normal guy, like his fingers look a little more normal. But by the time he's on the boat, and you've got that amazing scene where he's like over the hatch, where his claws are out to the side. Like he's got these long like talons on his fingers. Like his hands turn like gradually as he gains more power throughout the film. He becomes more animal-like in appearance. Yeah. Which is something I didn't notice on previous watches, but because I've seen this over and over the last few weeks, it's something that stood out to me. Is it's like, and then I looked it up, and it was intentional. Like they actually built longer fingers on him as the shoot went on.
I was gonna say, if you didn't have any evidence of that, I still totally buy that was a choice by the filmmakers, because there's a lot I feel like in this movie that these guys were ahead of their time with thinking through some of this stuff.
For sure. Absolutely. I mentioned that, they would see, these villagers would see Count Orlok or Max Schreck while they were filming outside. Well, they filmed all those scenes, like I said, in broad daylight. They filmed pretty much all of the outdoor scenes in this in broad daylight because the film stock that was used at this time wasn't sensitive enough to shoot at night outdoors. You could shoot indoors because then you can blast lights, right? But outdoors, they didn't have the technology to do it. So the effect of nighttime would be achieved in the edit by tinting all of the nighttime scenes blue, which is something that up until maybe a decade ago, most copies of Nosferatu that were in circulation were just fully black and white. But that would be very confusing when it gets to those final scenes where he gets killed by daylight, at the end of the movie, because if you've only watched the black and white untinted version of this, it looks like he's walking around in daylight the whole movie.
Yeah.
When we get to like somebody needs a nap, I don't even remember if I saved some of these. I hope I did. I don't know. But anyway, some people were very bitchy about, and he's walking around at daytime and he's like moving caskets and stuff. And like, I guess it's supposed to be night, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, you obviously watched like one version.
Right.
This movie.
Exactly.
The versions, because I watched it twice before our live event, and both of those were fully black and white. So when we got to the live event, and Justin, you had the copy that you had, I was blown away. I was like,
it's a vastly different experience.
Yeah, it looks so good.
It really does. It really does. That Eureka restoration is phenomenal.
Is that still available?
Yeah, it's an Australian import though, so you'd have to it's a Region B Blu-ray that I have. So you would have to have a region free player.
Actually, it's a Region B Blu-ray.
Hey, listen, it is. I'm just saying, I don't want anyone to go out and buy it and then not be able to play it.
Right.
So, because if you don't have a region-free player, that's what's going to happen. So
there's got to be versions of this on streaming. I feel like that have
every version that I've looked up has been the black and white version.
Yeah.
On streaming services. I think that when Shudder had it, I think that they had the tinted one, like when Joe Bob did it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I saw that version with Joe Bob.
I think that was, but it's as of this recording, it's not currently on there. So, well, with all the exterior shots in the can, the production returned to Berlin, where most of the film's interiors were shot on studio sets. And in creating the look of the sets, Albin Grau was inspired by the sights that they had seen during their journey to Prague and back. For example, the arch doorway that you see Orlok comes through. He comes through a lot of arches in this film, which is a very like coffin-like shape for him to walk through, right?
Yeah.
But the shape of that like arch doorway, when we first see him like fully, when we first see him bald and everything, and he comes through with his arms kind of like down by his side, it's very creepy. But that doorway was based on one that they had seen in Prague, and he took note of that and he recreated it on set. Now, there aren't a lot of records of what happened during the several weeks where they were filming those interiors. However, an interview with a guy named Robert Hurth, who is an art director who worked with Murnau several times, including on The Last Laugh, which was filmed just 2 years after Nosferatu. It's kind of considered another one of Murnau's masterpieces, The Last Laugh. He described Murnau's working method, and I want to read this because I do think that it gives some insight into how Murnau worked as a director, even though this guy's referencing a different film than Nosferatu. So he says, "When I entered the studio, I was very much surprised at how quiet it was. For in the days of silent films, it was the custom to build sets while the shoot was actually going on, while there was usually a crowd of people talking at the tops of their voices, people who were simply there out of curiosity and had nothing to do with the actual shooting. But there was no one to be seen but the cameraman and one of the actors, Alfred Abel." Alfred Abel, by the way, is the guy who it is when those rumors of that Max Schreck was actually the pseudonym of another actor. It's Alfred Abel is the one that was rumored to, because he had also worked with Murnau later on. So anyway, but there was no one to be seen but the cameraman and one of the actors, Alfred Abel, and also standing in the dark, out of the way, a tall, slim gentleman in a white work coat, issuing directions in a very low voice. This was Murnau. Like that paints a picture, doesn't it? Like that quote, you just see him like very methodically shooting. He goes on to describe Murnau as a calm, courteous director who created great morale on set. Nothing like the character that John Malkovich plays in Shadow of the Vampire. He was apparently nothing like that at all. But Hurth will go on to sum up Murnau with these words. He says, "I have never known anyone who enjoyed the strange business of filmmaking so much as Murnau, although he took his work intensely seriously. For him, work itself was kind of an intoxication. He was fascinated and gripped by the actual processes, carried away in spite of himself, like a scientist performing an experiment in a laboratory or a surgeon during a complicated operation." So once filming and editing was completed, the final element in the production was to create a musical score. Murnau enlisted a composer named Hans Erdmann for the job. Now, not much is known about Hans Erdmann. Nosferatu was his first of only 3 films that he's credited on. That doesn't necessarily mean these are the only 3 that he worked on. They didn't have IMDb and stuff back then, so I don't know how great the record keeping was on things like this, But another of the films that the other most well-known film that he's credited on is Fritz Lang's The Testament of Dr. Mabuse. But this wasn't wholly uncommon in the silent era. Music for these films was performed live in the theater. I mean, we all know this, right? Usually by a pianist or an organist, although in some larger cities, theaters would hire a small orchestra. But for early silent films, the music was either improvised or compiled of classic repertory music. They weren't writing music directly for the film. Nosferatu was actually one of the earliest silent films to have a specially commissioned orchestral score, something that, of course, would become more commonplace in the following years, but it was not commonplace at the time. Albin Grau himself presided over the film's press campaign, writing articles and sending his production drawings to the press, even designing the film's promotional posters. One of these posters, maybe one of the first examples of a teaser poster, simply had the word Nosferatu right in the middle, flanked by 2 large question marks, with the dot of each question mark being this yin-yang logo of Prana Film. And during the promotion of the film, Grau, he did a lot of interviews. Like he was hustling, man. He wrote, there's a great article he wrote called Vampires, which is where he recounts the story of the Serbian farmer, which Eureka actually included in the little booklet that comes with their Blu-ray. It's really cool to read.
Nice.
But when in all these interviews, when he was promoting the film, he repeatedly boasted that he had made the first authentic occult film, which he probably had. So the first preview of Nosferatu was held in Berlin on March 4th, 1922. It was held at the zoo of all places, but it was a big fancy zoo. Right, this is like a big deal.
Nice.
Guess where it was a costume party. It was a masquerade, I guess you would say, where guests were asked to wear period costumes, like from the time period where Nosferatu is set. So it was a masquerade. And then the public premiere was held 11 days later on March 15th, 1922. The advanced publicity for the film, which is also probably Grau's work by most accounts, was designed to provoke the potential audience. It almost daring them to attend.
Nosferatu, who cannot die. A million fancies strike you when you hear the name Nosferatu. Nosferatu does not die. What do you expect at the first showing of this great work? Aren't you afraid? Men must die. The legend has it that a vampire, Nosferatu, the undead, lives on men's blood. You want to see a symphony of horror? You may expect more. Be careful. Nosferatu is not just fun, not something to be taken lightly. Once more, beware.
It's so good. It's like some William Castle shit, right? We are daring you to come watch this movie. I love that. I think that's great. I think it's awesome.
No, that's I love. I don't know. I love that the Cardi is alive and well even then. You know?
The huckster, like he's doing some huckster shit. Well, it would soon be revealed that Prana Film had spent more on publicity than they had on the actual production of the film. Probably that big shindig they had at the Berlin Zoo, the big costume ball, that was a big part of that. And unfortunately, the film, when it came out, was not a financial success, although reviews in Germany were almost unanimously positive. However, it's been 100 years since this movie came out. About 25 of those have involved the internet. Maybe 30 years. The internet.
I honest to God don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like wide use of the internet. So there's been plenty of time for other people to voice their opinions, Gary. So did you happen to find anyone on the internet who didn't like this film?
Weirdly enough, everybody loved Nosferatu. No! Nay! Much less, much like the Nosferatu of yore, some folks need to go take a nap.
Count Orlok does need a nap, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Maybe that would solve everything.
He looked like he'd been staying up too late.
Yeah. His eyebrows need some TLC for sure. Jeez Louise.
Well, these range the spectrum, fellas. There's a lot of different reasons to hate this movie. Some we haven't even had a chance to cover. Some we won't. But let's see. William Gekas over here with 1 out of 5 stars. I bought this for my sci-fi class. We read Bram Stoker, and the reward was supposed to be this film. It was like giving kids liver for dinner and rewarding them with canned spinach. Everyone was so disappointed. I kept waiting for it to get better, and it never did. The history of the film with the lawsuits is really interesting, and the clips you've seen are wonderfully scary with brilliant makeup. The problem is that there's a month's worth of boring between all the good stuff. Fast forward, or the students who expect CGI will fall asleep if they stay in class that long. Bela Lugosi is a much better bet. For a silent, Metropolis is much more compelling, even to those CG fans.
Interesting take. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of like people who just think silent movies are boring. And here's the thing. I think Metropolis is way more boring than this movie, personally. Metropolis is also like 2.5 hours long, isn't it? So it's like
it is long.
Yeah,
I like it.
Every time I tried to watch
long.
Metropolis, I've been like, wow, this is a lot.
I mean, it's cool, but it's like, it's a bit of a chore. It feels like you're doing homework.
Yeah. I think I tried to mix it up here. We'll see. Nick gives it 1 out of 5. This because the title is Needs Work. Like, let's go back to the drawing board.
Yeah,
fellas.
Can we
Round everybody up. Let's
Yeah,
round
let's get another
everybody up
draft on
for
this.
for a redo.
I see some potential here, but the plot leaves something to be desired. Also, I can totally see through that CGI. The green screen work was amateur at best. Also, where was the werewolf love interest? I thought this had a werewolf. The books were better.
Was he
Okay,
watching
actually,
Twilight? Is he watching
Yeah,
Twilight?
I was going to say, I think this guy was joking the whole time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
never mind. I'm sorry, Nick. You were right. The joke was ahead of me.
I've been watching the Twilight movies for the first time, by the way.
Why?
Oh, they got nothing on this.
Why?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, my theme
They
this
asked you
Halloween.
why. I know why.
This theme this Halloween is 31 days of vampire movies. That's
Oh,
why I'm
that's
watching
right.
31 vampire movies, and I've never seen the Twilight movies, so I'm 3 in, 2 more left. We'll report back.
Okay,
Now you're
fair
getting
enough.
to the good shit. Now you're going to be really just. My favorite is the third one. Honestly, I think
David
that's
Slade's
my-
a good director. He elevates it a little bit.
Yeah, my favorite's the third. But what is it? Breaking Dawn.
Breaking Dawn, yeah.
Part 2 will make you happy. It's like
Okay.
watching a Fast and the Furious movie.
Excellent. Excited.
You're just like, what the fuck is this even happening? What is happening now?
That's why I'm looking forward to it.
1 out of 10 from Give and Take here. This is an awful movie. At times it was so boring I wanted to throw my TV out of the window. The guy's performance as a vampire is okay, but nothing to write home about. The camera work is atrocious. It's as if the moron of a director had a towel over half the camera the whole movie. The movie was maybe groundbreaking when it was released, but today it's boring and it's absolutely unwatchable. Awful acting, awful directing, badly dated, now stupid movie. Do yourself a favor and don't watch this movie. I'd rather sit through a marathon of Snoop Dogg movies than watch this one again. This movie was made in 1922, for heaven's sake. How can anybody possibly get any enjoyment out of something so old and primitive?
Wow.
Jeez.
That review went a lot of places. Like,
Yeah.
it was almost intelligent, then it was weird, and then it was like, I don't know. Who talks about I'd rather watch a Snoop Dogg marathon and then
Which
says,
would be
for
what?
heaven's sake. For heaven's
What would a Snoop Dogg marathon even involve other than Bones?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure he's done cameos.
Soul
Like,
Plane.
I'm pretty sure he has and like Half Baked, right? Doesn't he have a cameo in that?
Right.
Like every famous stoner has a cameo in that movie.
Didn't
Right.
he recently? Oh, he recently did a vampire hunter movie with Jamie Foxx.
Oh yeah, Day
He
Shift.
is in
Yeah,
that one.
He is in Day Shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
James says this movie's garbage. 1 star. There aren't many people alive who saw this movie when it came out, so people rating it high are just full of it. There's nothing groundbreaking or compelling about this, even in its time.
Well, that's just an
Hard
ignorant
disagree,
statement. Yeah.
James.
That's just you can not enjoy it, but saying that it's not groundbreaking, I mean, it literally like is. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's not even an argument.
They dug up coffins.
Yeah.
Can't
They
break
got a real
more ground
vampire.
than that. 1 star from Panda Pentium. Old movies are just over-romanticized nostalgia trips. They're awful. The quality of this film in particular is just awful. I get it. It matches the time period, but we have better vampire movies out there. Old movies are awful. Quality's garbage. People go on nostalgia trips and refuse to acknowledge just how terrible the quality of the films are. I've seen handmade Halloween costumes that look better than any of the outfits in this movie. Just as bad as Night of the Living Dead, honestly.
Oh, fuck
Whoa.
off. Someone just saying old movies and just such a broad statement. Old movies suck. Like what qualifies as old to you? You
I
know,
don't know. Because
Like-
guess what? Whether you like it or not, buddy, eventually
the movies
gonna
you're
be old.
watching right now are going to be old. The movies that you're enjoying are going to be considered old movies.
Oh, yeah.
Ridiculousness.
Ridiculousness. It's a TV show that airs 17
not
times
that.
a day.
It's
on
not that.
TV.
Warning, spoilers. I'm sorry, but this is awful. No offense to old movies. I like them personally. And no offense to Max Schreck, who did a really good job of portraying creepy vampire man, but Nosferatu sucked. After reading the book Dracula, on which this was based, yes, it says in the opening credits that it's based on Dracula. I'm absolutely appalled that this is hailed as a masterpiece of horror cinema. The exaggerated acting, while understandable, is annoying and really destroys that suspension of disbelief with the silly faces that only succeed in making you laugh. It truly mangles the book. Nina Harker becomes Nina Harker. Arthur, Lucy's husband, becomes simply Westenra. Lucy doesn't sleep.
They probably watched one with different intertitles or something.
I was about to say they definitely,
because there were. I mean, I don't think we're really going to get into it, but there were a lot of different versions of this movie out there, and some of them just called it Dracula. Like it went under multiple different names, and some of them the intertitles, like the names were changed to like Jonathan Harker, or the names were changed to match the actual characters from different. Yeah, so that's probably what they watched.
I'm going to skip this one because they're just like this mangled the book. Okay, well,
yeah. Fuck
gross ass says
gross ass.
Half star. I didn't like the film. I honestly didn't know what was going on most of the time. I also took a nap on most of the parts because of how boring it was. Not only that, but it was creepy how Nosferatu, in parentheses, the vampire, was just watching the man sleep. If you go to watch this film, I recommend not watching it at night, but during the day.
So it scared him, but also bored him.
This is my personal favorite review. This is from Jake, and it's a half star. It was actually from September 9th, 2023. So recently, shit was ass.
To the point.
Lee gave it a half star and said, if I had paid to watch this shit in 1922, I would have burned the picture house to the ground. I felt insanity brewing having to endure 1 hour and 20 minutes of this. Side note, Mac Shrek, I was not familiar with your game. You would have loved your SpongeBob cameo. Half star from Highland Fat Fuck.
Wait, Highland?
No, I'm sorry. It's Highfield Fat Fuck.
Oh, man. I thought it was Highland. I was going to make you read it in a Scottish accent if it was Highland.
I know. I should have. It's Highfield Fat Fuck. I think I was also wishing that upon it. 1, if you're ever taking Frankenstein for granted, watch this. 2, the ending is actually abysmal. Not that I actually care, because so is the rest of the movie. 3, can motherfuckers back then not read? Because the fucking text is up for like 20 plus seconds every time, even if it's just 1 to 2 sentences, which is almost every time. Probably the worst movie I've ever seen.
Yeah. All right.
There you go.
There it is.
Oh, we still got more. Jasmine, half star. So this is where the plot for Bram Stoker's Dracula came from. I don't prefer this version, to be honest. I don't tend to like silent movies, and I prefer Gary Oldman being a sexy vampire sometimes rather than the bug-eyed rat face in this movie.
That person thinks that the Francis Ford Coppola movie is a remake of this. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
They don't know that the book exists?
And that Bram, yeah, I guess.
And or maybe do they not wonder who Bram Stoker is?
Yeah, I don't know. That's so weird. Curfy gave it 1 star, but says, Justin, you'll like this. Twilight did it better. And finally, Maria with a half star, who says, the longest hour and a half in my life. I didn't go to film school, so I couldn't even masturbate to it.
Oh, man. I didn't go to film school, and I had no problem masturbating to it.
And that's all the time we have on Cinema Shock. Thanks so much for joining us. Check us out online, cinemashock.net.
Oh, man.
Oh, well, I mean, the reviews at the time, though, despite some of these, what I assume are youngins who just can't appreciate an older film, because based on what a lot of those said, almost all of the reviews in Germany at the time of its release were, like I said before, unanimously positive. I think there was 1 negative review in all of the like major German publications, but everyone else pretty much praised it. But unfortunately, good reviews, in the absence of good box office, did very little to fend off Prana Films' debts, and the company was taken into receivership by the Deutsche Amerikanische Film Union, or the DAFU. Yes, that does just translate to German American Film Union.
The fuck you.
So it enters into receivership by the DAFU, and then Florence Stoker entered the story.
Bum, bum, bum.
So Florence Stoker was, of course, the widow of Dracula author Bram Stoker, who died in 1912. Bram Stoker died in 1912, not Florence. She was still alive during the rest of the story.
But she had a problem with it. Yeah,
Gotcha.
would have been a lot freakier and more movie worthy if she hadn't.
If she had risen from the dead 20 years later.
That's the sequel to Shadow of the Vampire. Is a dead Florence Stoker.
Dead Florence Stoker coming back.
Yeah.
On F.W. Murnau. So, although Dracula was not yet an international bestseller in 1921, it was one of the few Stoker works that had steadily remained in print since its publication, and its sales provided a modest but reliable income for Florence.
I will be the guy here that goes to bat a little bit for Florence, because I feel like she's getting a bad rap in the story everywhere I read it. And
well, yeah, before you go on, I agree. I think that a lot of the lore around Nosferatu paint her as someone who's like trying to kill this piece of art, but she had the legal rights to do what she did. 100%.
Yeah, and before 1912, when Bram Stoker died, he had been pretty careful from everything I read with like trying to copyright material, or at least being conscious of that. 8 days before it was published in 1897, he even organized a reading of it in
which was
London.
This like, that was like kind of a weird way of like preserving a copyright, or at least a lot of people thought it was in this time period, if you did like a live reading or something of it, right?
Yeah, that's true. But he also had this like secret dream, apparently, that it would become a stage play. Like he wanted to become this great work on stage.
Well, he worked. I mean, he worked in a theater. He worked at the Lyceum Theater under Henry Irving, so he was a big stage guy.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, and actually, that's a great point, because when he did this at the Lyceum Theater, he was hoping that it would like start production on this thing, and his employer was Sir Henry Irving, like you just said, and he wanted him to play the vampire in the stage play. And after the reading, Irving was reported to have watched it and said, "This is dreadful."
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it was kind of a bummer for Stoker, but at least he was trying to like preserve it. But by like 1922, when all this was going on, Florence had the rights to all this stuff, but she was not like some wealthy lady based off this story. The novel was not like what Dracula is now. It was not some sensation.
No. It was reliable as like a back catalog title. Like you could go and get it. It stayed in print. It was by 1921. I think it was the only of Stoker's novels that were still like that had stayed consistently in print the whole time.
Right.
So she wasn't like getting rich off of it. She was surviving off of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So about a month after Nosferatu's premiere in March of 1922, Stoker was sent a mysterious and unmarked letter that included the program from the premiere. That was that big premiere that was at the zoo, right? The program brazenly stated that the movie was, quote, freely adapted from Bram Stoker's novel. So they put it there in the it's not in the film. Now, I know one of the reviews I think that we read said that it was in the film. There were prints of the film later on in its life, because this movie has quite the life over the years, different prints, different versions, and there were some that said that, but originally it did not say that on the film. But the program that they distributed at the premiere did say freely adapted from Bram Stoker's novel. So she retained legal representation from the British Incorporated Society of Authors and raged war on the film's producers. You see, she had caught wind of that big premiere in Berlin, which, like I said, it took place at the Berlin Zoo. It was this big costume party. They had a full orchestra playing the score there. Like, it was a big production, a big deal. So in her mind, she's like, these guys have money to burn, right? They spent all this money on this premiere. They must be loaded, and they're making money off of my husband's work, and I'm not seeing any of it. So it's understandable that she would be kind of pissed off about it.
Yeah.
But as we've already mentioned, they had burned through all of their money in the promotion of the film and were, in fact, flat broke. I mean, to the point where they've been taken under receivership from another organization. So Prana Film doesn't have any money. Prana Film doesn't basically exist at this point. Well, the Society of Authors were initially reluctant to help Florence, but she managed to annoy and pester them enough that in the summer of 1922, they hired a German lawyer for a case against Prana Film.
Yeah, it was the idea that, like, I mean, I think for them, it was, from everything I read, it's just a legal challenge in a foreign country. It's risky, it's expensive. You don't want to deal with it.
And she had also just become a member of the Society of Authors. So a lot of the other members who had been paying dues for years and years and years and had never asked for like legal help from the society were kind of put off by someone who, like, she joined them just to get them to help her with this. So they kind of like had some resentment towards her for like joining and then immediately asking for help, whereas they've been members for 10 years and I've never asked for help and I pay my dues every year.
Right. And there's a website, the Irish Times. They had a great interview with I think his name was Bram Stoker, who is like the great grandnephew of Bram and Florence. And but yeah, I mean, they kind of said the same. A quote from Dockery was just like, Florence was a person of principle, just like Bram. And I think she knew that what was right was worth fighting for. She needed help. Once they got to court and she presented the case, it was simple. Dracula was under copyright, and as the author's widow, she was the rights holder. Prada Film ripped her off. She deserved this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's 100% correct. They did rip her off. So this case went on for years. When it became clear that Stoker wasn't going to get any money from Prana or the DAFU, Florence kind of changed her strategy and began demanding that all copies and prints of Nosferatu be destroyed. And this was a battle that she actually won. In July of 1925, so this is 3+ years after the movie premiered, a German judge ordered that all copies of the film be rounded up and incinerated. But by this time, again, 3.5 years later, Nosferatu had plenty of time to get into circulation all over the world.
Just for clarification, too, in that interview, they say and present that they said, like, Florence Stoker, for the record, was not who requested that. They say that they have letters that were specifically the lawyers engaged by the Incorporated Society of Authors were the people who were requesting that all copies of this film be destroyed. That she did not say that. That she just wanted compensation for it.
Yeah.
It's weird. Supposedly, like, they tried to argue they had approached her or something, and she turned them down because they had kind of pitched it as like this we'll do the same story, but like a rat thing is going to be the blood, and she had turned them down. They don't have any record that actually happened. She did not cop to that or anything, but anyway, just to throw that out there again too.
Gotta have it in writing.
Yeah, and we don't know necessarily, apparently based on these people, she didn't even say that they had to destroy everything. She just wanted payment.
Well, and from what I understand in my reading on this is that she didn't know about Nosferatu's existence until somebody sent her that program. And I don't think she ever actually watched the film. I think that she was just aware of it and knew that it was based on her story, based on obviously everyone's account. If you've seen the movie and read the book, then it's clear,
Yeah, right.
But thankfully for us, the film did survive. Now, there is a much repeated myth that only one copy survived, that it was smuggled out from under Florence Stoker's nose and taken overseas or whatever. But that is, that makes for a good story, but it is far from the truth. Like I said, it was 3 years before they ordered it to be destroyed. So it's already, there are prints and negatives going all over the world in circulation. So the film continued to screen under various titles in the year after it was ordered to be destroyed. It premiered in New York City in 1929.
New York City?
It became
Todd, I think it's time you switch brands.
Excellent throwback to a commercial from 1993.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with this at all.
It became a particular favorite of the French surrealists in the 1930s, especially for André Breton, who we've talked about on the podcast a lot during our Jodorowsky series. He wrote about it multiple times.
I know we're not trying to dig so much into the history of Dracula, but I just want to say I think it's worth mentioning here that one thing I thought was cool about that, especially from that interview with the Irish Times and some stuff I read, that this legal debacle basically drove Florence nuts. Like, all she wanted to do, according to everything they had, was to make Bram Stoker's dream a reality. And she ended up in the middle of all of this. She actually had this actor named Hamilton Dean adapt the story into this traveling play. Like, I guess he pitched it, and she finally was like, I need money, and I'm dying over here. So fine, fuck it, take it and run with it. And so she was broke in pocket and spirit. So she gave this guy the rights to run off with it in a play. Now, like, if you look at Dracula, and I read this so long ago, I don't even remember, but like Nosferatu and Dracula are different. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about that, but like Dracula was kind of more aggressive and monster-like. And there was it's almost interesting because like Nosferatu has a little bit more of the, like, you start to see the human side evolve of him a little bit, because Nosferatu, although he looks like, or sorry, Count Orlok, although he looks like that, wants to have the appearance of humanity, like tries to cover the ears, tries to.
But unlike in Dracula, his physical appearance doesn't change, doesn't transform.
Right. And so, you know, they're trying to feed brother when he comes over, trying to make him feel at home.
He honestly just wants a friend. This is a story about a man who just wants a friend.
Right. So this guy actually did the play, and this is where it started to get a little even more like human with Dracula, like a little more the Dracula you start to know. If you're wondering, by the way, she fucking hated the play. And for good reason, I guess. It was bad, and it was like, apparently in London was like the laughing stock of critics. But you know what, it sold out every single night.
It made money.
It appeared, and then it started traveling around in the country and in the smaller areas. It was huge. It blew the place out. So somehow that play like transformed, like it transformed the Dracula you're more familiar with today, which was what I was trying to say. It was like, it was cheaper, so they got to, you know, to do like an old dandy in a cape, and so they did that look for him, and so it ignored a lot of the book, but the bones were there, and yeah, maybe Florence got desperate, she sold out to this guy, but because of that play, eventually another playwright saw it, John Balderston, and he called this version, the Dean version, quote, illiterate. But he took it and he morphed some things around. He kept the high society Count Dracula, and then that version was adapted to a version that appeared on around Broadway, eventually starring none other than the gentleman named Bela Lugosi, who gave it that sexiest of sex, which led right to Universal Studios, who didn't give a shit about what was going on in Berlin, who bought that thing for, I think I read $40,000, which was roughly around, you know, like $500,000 or over $500,000 a day, which did lead to Florence being able to be comfortable on her way out.
At least for the last, I think she died in 1937, so she would have been alive for another 6 years after the film was released.
Yeah, so Dr. Stoker said that in the end, he felt like it was a happy ending. He said, Nosferatu remains, and Florence got her money for the stage and the film rights. But most importantly, she set an important symbolic precedent. Every author, artist, and musician should thank Mrs. Stoker for the precedent she helped set in this instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
thanks, Flo.
And this is a story that we will probably continue one day when we do Todd Browning's Dracula. You know, like this is something that can lead into that one day, because the story does it. And Gary, you just kind of touched on the bullet points, the Cliff's Notes version of that, but it's I mean, it's a hell of a story. The Dracula's Road to the Screen.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you could call Nosferatu probably the most widely known, certainly the most widely seen film of the silent era. That sounds like hyperbole, but I think it might be true. I mean, there are works by the likes of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton that might give it a run for its money to get that title, but I'd still be willing to bet that more people have seen Nosferatu than have seen, let's say, City Lights or The General, you know? So I wanted to ask the two of you, what are your experiences, because this is the first one we've discussed on the podcast, but what are your experiences with silent movies? Have you seen many of them? Do you enjoy them?
my most memorable viewing of a silent film, which I appreciate silent films, so let's go ahead and put that out there. But my most memorable viewing was when I worked at a college. They did a viewing, a screening of Robin Hood. But what they did was they brought in musicians to play the score on period accurate instruments. So you really got that medieval sound to go with
that's cool
to go with the image. Yeah, it was an absolute blast. I really enjoyed it. I mentioned that I saw it twice, obviously not the copy that you have, Justin, the like fully restored, or at least as much as possible restored version, but the versions that I watched, they both had different soundtracks, and I think that's a really fun thing now with a lot of these silent films. They're in the public domain. I think it's a fun way to kind of put your own spin on it, especially if you're a fan of the vampire genre, the horror genre, but you've got these fun mixes of different songs and stuff like that to go ahead and kind of build your own version of the film. It's that art inspiring art. I really dig that. From the viewing of the version that you had at the live event, Justin, the reason I asked earlier about if it's still available, I want to get a copy, like seeing it.
The way it's supposed to be seen.
Yeah, the way it's supposed to be seen is really, really good. It's really good.
It is.
So,
and the score on that Eureka version is the original composed score. Obviously not a recording because it wasn't recorded, but it was an orchestra playing the original composition that Hans Erdmann had written for Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Which is maybe one of the only home video versions that has that version of the score available.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned Metropolis earlier. I actually have the poster for Metropolis hanging on the wall of my office. Like, nice. It's a weird movie, but it's sci-fi. It's
so
cool.
Influential.
Yeah, I really dig it.
I mean, tell me George Lucas, when he created C-3PO, was not influenced by what's her name?
Yeah.
Maria or something?
Yeah, absolutely. No, the name escapes me, but yeah, it's I really dig it because they all have that sort of low budget skeleton crew, very DIY type of feel, and there's something very honest about that. There's something you can feel the passion of these filmmakers on the screen. Just they don't have anything.
They don't have a frame of reference.
Yeah. They
necessarily like I mean, the cinematic medium is only maybe 30 years old at this point, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have anything to really like compare themselves to. So they're just like fully freed,
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, I don't think I even had like this thought before. This is why you're a great podcast host, Justin. You start the discussion. And but no, like literally sitting here, I was thinking, like, what are the silent films I've seen? And Metropolis is one. And so I'm like, actually, I think it's all sci-fi horror that I could like rake it in. Like I've seen like Chaplin stuff, like some stuff with that, but like otherwise it's Haxan, it's a Trip to the Moon, because I'm a Smashing Pumpkins fan,
which is also George Méliès, who we mentioned earlier. He did House of the Devil. A Trip to the Moon, of course, is his most popular, most well-known film.
Yeah, and I knew it I just found it because of the Tonight video.
Of course, yeah.
And the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, that kind of stuff. And then Nosferatu. I don't but what Todd was saying to his point is that it is cool, like you said, like no frame of reference, but also I think the spirit of silent film, and especially like a film like Nosferatu that you can really appreciate, is the same thing we love about horror movies in general. Still to this day, is especially like some of our favorites are low budget movies and people piecing things together, going back to Sam Raimi and the Evil Dead, like people just like trying to pull together what they had to like make something happen. And it almost feels like Nosferatu still has that same spirit, like it just like some really wicked stuff that like I don't care that it's a silent movie. Nosferatu has some creepy fucking stuff in it. It really does have some stuff that stands out still to this day, and so props to those guys because they were thinking way ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those people who you were reading reviews of, they had issues with it, like thinking it was boring and things like that. But I think that you have to meet a movie halfway.
Yeah.
Like you have to go into this knowing it's a silent film and watching it on its own terms, just like any other movie. And I think if you do that, if you give yourself over to that experience, then you can find a lot to enjoy about a movie that, yes, there are antiquated things going on here, right? I mean, I've seen a decent amount of silent movies. I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means. I've seen a lot of Charlie Chaplin, and I've seen several Buster Keaton. I've seen Steamboat Jr. in the general, like the most well-known Buster Keaton stuff. Haxan, which if we want to get into further viewing, that's going to be my pick, would be Haxan, or Carl Theodor Dreyer, who was a silent filmmaker, but he did a movie called Vampire in 1932, a year after the Bela Lugosi Dracula, although Carl Theodor Dreyer is probably best known for The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is probably considered by many people to be the greatest silent film of all time.
The greatest, yeah. I've never seen it, but it's definitely like always been like the silent film you need to see.
So he did a vampire movie after that, which does have sound, and it's on Criterion. Criterion released it on Blu-ray and stuff, and it's on the channel, so you can watch it pretty well. It's a very different vampire story than Nosferatu, but it's very, very cool. So I would definitely recommend that. But yeah, I think most of my silent movie experience is also like you, Gary, with genre stuff, because genre stuff transcends time a little bit more than some other things do. And when I say genre stuff, I am also including the Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton stuff in there, because not all comedy stands the test of time.
Very true.
That physical comedy, what they're doing in those movies, translates very well to now, as opposed to like a joke, like a audible joke doesn't necessarily translate as well, because physical comedy doesn't get dated. Like, so watching somebody slip on a banana peel and fall down is going to be funny every century that humanity exists.
Yep.
And the same thing goes with horror. People are always going to be scared. People are always going to find things to be creeped out. As long as the sun sets and darkness exists, people are going to find things to be scared about. So I think that horror films and sci-fi films and comedy, even the silent stuff, ages much better than something like Passion of Joan of Arc, which is an incredible film, but is more taxing on a lot of viewers because it doesn't have those extreme elements that some of these other ones do. So you guys, I know, so we've mentioned it several times during this. We did a live show, the first ever Cinema Shock live show a few weeks ago, and we showed Nosferatu with our friends from Gut Punch Cinema. It was a great event. We had a great turnout. We were actually kind of shocked by the turnout. So it was probably 2 or 3 times what I think we were expecting. So it was really great. So if you came out to that, obviously, thank you very much. It was a really fun time. But in preparing for that, I think we all watched Nosferatu multiple times, including at that screening, but I think we had all watched it at least once or twice before that. But before that preparation, had you guys seen Nosferatu before? Had you ever watched it?
Oh yeah, I had, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you're a horror guy, so that makes sense.
Yeah. I had literally I had definitely seen Nosferatu, and I think think I like literally reviewed it on Letterboxd the year before I saw. So
Oh
like,
yeah,
it
you
was
did.
like
You actually
almost-
did. I remember reading it.
Yeah.
You watched it like about a year ago, but like maybe during Halloween last year.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Nice.
How about you,
Yeah,
Todd? Had you ever seen it before? Was this the first time?
I think this was a first viewing for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you see so much of the imagery that you maybe like just by cultural osmosis.
Yeah.
Like
That's what I
feel
thought.
like you've seen it.
Yeah, and it seemed like every iconic, because there's quite a few, every iconic image that comes up, you're like, have I
I've
seen
seen
this
that.
before?
Yeah, exactly.
like
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think Dracula, even the character of Dracula, has been portrayed in popular culture probably more than like any other character.
Yeah.
I think Dracula has probably appeared in more stories than any other character in popular culture.
You know what's I was literally thinking about this today too, is that, you know, we know Dracula, right? Like we know Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And when we would dress, if you were going to dress up as Dracula when we were kids, it's Bela Lugosi's Dracula.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's that version. But as I was like, has it come full circle that like Count Orlok is the version of Dracula? I don't know. Because like he's in SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think it's quite come full circle yet. I mean, Dracula, like as an image, the Bela Lugosi thing is the one that was created on stage by Bela Lugosi or immortalized by Todd Browning in that film. That is the image of Dracula most people are familiar with. Even people who have never watched Dracula or read Dracula, like a child could look at an image of Dracula. I mean, it's on fucking Sesame Street. The Count is based on Bela Lugosi's Dracula, right? So like everyone recognizes Dracula again because of just pure cultural osmosis. Like it's just everywhere. You can go. I mean, one of the prizes I gave away at the event was a Pez dispenser Dracula, right? So like he's everywhere. You can find Dracula on anything. But yeah, most of the time it is that Bela Lugosi version, right? He's dapper, handsome. He's a sex symbol. He is clad in a tuxedo and a cape, right? But Nosferatu is different. Count Orlok, you know, the name Count Orlok may not be as known as Dracula's, nor is his image as instantly iconic. But Max Schreck's his take on the vampire has still managed to persist for a century. I mean, we still see versions of vampires that are based on this movie that we talked about on the podcast, Salem's Lot. The character that those vampires are 100% based on Nosferatu. If you've watched What We Do in the Shadows, what's his name? Peter? Is that his name? Peter? He looks like this. He looks like Count Orlok. 30 Days of Night, those vampires look like Count Orlok. Blade 2, those vampires are based on Count Orlok, right? Like that version of this animalistic, he's not a seducer like Bela Lugosi. He is a monster. He's a ghoul. He's an animal. He's he's scary because of that. And that version of the character is very different from like the sexy vampire, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had a better way to segue into this a little bit, but some of the stuff we read in reviews and that came up at our live show is that the look of Count Orlok leads into this anti-Semitism. You know, from everything I could read about this, I know it's easy to like attribute this to the filmmakers, but Murnau was gay.
Right.
And you know,
so he was on that subject, and I think this is where you were going with this.
Yeah.
There is a lot of like people who have interpreted this as anti-Semitic. A lot of it's based on the appearance of Count Orlok, specifically the nose prosthetic. That nose design, by the way, comes directly from Bram Stoker's text. He describes it in the book, and that's what they did, this sort of beak of a nose.
Some people say it's Stoker and these guys.
Yeah,
like
but these guys, if you think about these guys, I mean, Henrik Galeen, the screenwriter, was Jewish.
He's a Jew.
He's Jewish. He went into exile in Switzerland when the Nazis rose to power. Albin Grau fled Germany to escape the Nazis. Gustav von Wagenheim, who plays Hutter, fled Germany to escape the Nazis. Alexander Granach, who played Canuck, also Jewish, also fled Germany to escape the Nazis. Ruth Lansoff, John Gotthard, who was Jewish, like all of them fled Germany. Almost the entire cast. The only one that I think of the main cast and crew who stayed was Wagner, the cameraman, who ended up out of desperation making propaganda films for the Nazis because he couldn't find any other kind of work. But
like Triumph of the Will, that was another silent film we didn't mention.
Yeah, we won't. Yeah, that one's not as good. But by the time the Nazis came to power, Murnau was already in the United States. He had already fled Germany. He had not fled Germany. He had come to the States to work, but he was already in Germany. But F.W. Murnau certainly did not sympathize with the Nazis because, as you said, Gary, F.W. Murnau was gay and thus a target of the Nazis. So he did not sympathize with them at all. I don't think there's any evidence that I've seen or read that would indicate that anyone involved in the creation of this film was anti-Semitic. I think that there were people that came after them, members of the Nazi Party, who tried to propagandize Nosferatu
there were 100%
as an anti-Semitic work. And I get that because there's this long-standing, story, this anti-Semitic narrative involving blood libel and involving Jewish people being seen as rodent-like and things like that you can definitely see the parallels between Nosferatu and those anti-Semitic images of Jewish people. But I don't think that was the intention of the filmmakers. Now, Bram Stoker, I don't know. I don't know what his intentions were, but I don't know F.W. Murnau's intentions, but based on the evidence, I don't think that there's anything that would prove that that would even remotely indicate that he was anti-Semitic.
Yeah. It seems like if anybody, he would be very anti dealing with that shit. Yeah, and again with Stoker, I don't know. But that Dracula, I think, was already, God, if I'm not mistaken, he was already like in the land and talks about invading a new place or something like that. So I could see, I don't know. It's tough looking back on that stuff.
And obviously we can't say for certain at all without a time machine. There's no way for us to know.
Yeah.
And even without a time machine, if I could go back and ask F.W. Murnau, I don't speak German, so so I don't think I can get an answer out of him.
Yeah, I mean, even worse, it's always tough because, like, I don't know. I love a lot of Lovecraft stuff, and that guy
is blatantly anti-Semitic.
Yeah, he's a tough sell.
Yeah,
to any party, and so as a person, but
yeah.
Anyway, I legitimately don't feel like though that the people. Like, I get how people used it, but I don't feel like Nosferatu was intended that way.
That's where I stand. I agree with that. And based on all the reading I've done, which has been quite a lot for this episode, just because it's very interesting to me. So I'm even reading stuff that I won't even mention I won't even get a chance to bring up during this episode just because it's so interesting to me. But nothing that I've read has indicated that would be the case. I mean, it is, when you're talking about Nosferatu, it's kind of hard to overstate the significance of this film. Like, it is the father, or the godfather of every cinematic vampire that would come after, right? He's instantly recognizable, just like we said before, even in silhouette. And the film contains scenes that, over the course of the next several decades would become cliche in a modern horror film. You've got the scene where you've got the local bar filled with townspeople warning our hero not to continue their journey. Like, I mean, you could point out 100 horror movies that have done that. American Werewolf in London is the one that always comes up for me. But you walk into a bar and everyone hears that you're going to Count Orlok's castle, and they just stop and the music stops and everyone stares.
A glass breaks.
Right. It's that scene. You've got the scene where you've got your stagecoach. They refuse to go past a certain point. They're like, we're not going past this point. Or even the scene where Hutter cuts himself at the dinner table. igniting a bloodthirst in Orlok is one that we've seen in nearly every vampire movie since then. Like there's some version of that. I mentioned to you guys I was watching Twilight. There's that scene exists in Twilight at Bella's birthday party. She cuts she gets a little paper cut, and Jasper, is it Jasper, the one from Texas?
Yeah,
he like comes after her, right? Yeah, so
yeah, he's gonna turn right around at Breaking Dawn. Now he's a war hero. So,
yeah, I mean, I like Jasper. I'm team. I'm team. For the record, I'm team Alice right now. 3 movies in, so
I have been team Alice since day one.
Yeah,
Alice got it going on.
Right.
So she's also, by the way, I can connect this. Hold on, Alice. She's in that Toby Hooper movie.
The actress?
Yeah, the actress who plays Alice.
She's in a Toby Hooper movie.
Is it Toby Hooper?
How could it be?
Hold on. Who plays Alice? I'm going to do this live on the podcast. Who plays Alice Twilight? That is Ashley Greene. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Is that right?
You could just go to IMDb, Gary.
Yeah. Ashley Greene, Toby Hooper. There's a connection here. I know there is. No, wait. What am I thinking of? This is not going well. Todd, who's the guy who plays Chekhov in the new Star Trek? What's his name?
Anton Yelchin.
Anton Yelchin.
He was not in a Toby Hooper movie either. What are you talking about? He was in a Joe Dante movie, Bearing the
Joe
X.
Dante is who I'm thinking of.
Bearing the X.
Burying the X. Oh,
is she in
fucked
that?
This up. Yeah, she's in that.
Okay,
she's fine as hell. She's the X. But all right. Well, I'll connect it to Toby Hooper in this way. Salem's Lot. How about that? Toby Hooper directed Salem's Lot.
Yeah, we've already brought up Salem's Lot.
Yeah, so I mean, Salem's Lot looks
really
like
good.
Count Orlok.
Excellent content.
This is what the people pay to see.
But all of this stuff, all of these, like what we see now is cliches, right? The stagecoach driver stopping the townspeople in the bar, like all this seems like cliche now, but this was all new at the time, right? This kind of goes back to what we said before. There were no previous vampire movies to steal from. So I read his Roger Ebert wrote a review of this for his like great movies series, that he does or did. In 1997, he wrote about Nosferatu. And I love this quote from his review. He says, "To watch F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu is to see the vampire movie before it had really seen itself. Here is the story of Dracula before it was buried alive in cliches, jokes, TV skits, cartoons, and more than 30 other films. This film is in awe of its material. It seems to really believe in vampires."
I love that. I mean, and you can buy that because of the legend of Max Schreck.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. He's that convincing, right? And the when Alvin Grau came up with the look of Orlok, he had to create that from scratch. Like he didn't have anything to really compare it to. I mean, obviously he took some cues from Stoker's novel, but he took others from European folklore. But the design that he created for Orlok is wholly original. Like it has nothing that had been seen before. Now we've seen it done, like we've mentioned, several iterations over the decades, but at the time, like this was the first time anyone had seen that, and I think that design is a big part of the character's impact, but also Schreck's performance as directed by F.W. Murnau is really what makes it work, because he's creepy.
Yeah, and to be honest, like there's even times where you can see that the look of Count Orlok, even if it's not a vampire movie, when they're trying to invoke someone who is creepy and slightly menacing, you see some of these elements come out, be it visual, be it performance or whatever. And I mean, it just goes to show you, like, it goes beyond vampire films. This is truly iconic.
Schreck does this thing where he moves in these slow, stiff movements, when he's not standing just completely like creepily still and staring at you through a window or something.
Yeah.
Like, even then he's like incredibly effective. And I can't say that many of the other performances in the film are restrained in any way whatsoever. Like they're all pretty over the top. But there's a nuance to Shrek's performance here that is kind of rare to see in silent films, films of this era, because everyone else they're playing it to the rafters, right?
Yeah.
The guy who plays what's his name, Grenache, who plays Canuck, like he is playing it to the rafters.
Oh yeah,
like big time. I mean, there is a reason that the rumor that he was a real vampire was so believable, because he is that effective in the role, and he freaked people out that much. I mean, all of the memorable scenes in this movie involve Shrek. The shadow of the clawed hands crawling across the walls, or my favorite sequence of the whole movie, his voyage on the death ship on the Demeter, or whatever they call it in this movie. It's got a different name, but that's my favorite sequence in the movie. It's fantastic. And it's so good and so scary, and then there's my favorite shot of the movie is towards the end, where you just see his head over I want to say Lucy, but whatever, the Mina character, Ellen, over Ellen's bed. You just barely see his face, like in the left side of the screen, and everything else is completely in shadow, and he's just kind of hovering over the bed. And it is a scary image.
Yeah.
Like it really is.
I mean, let's not forget the stomping up the stairs, not stomping, but creeping up the stairs.
Oh, where you just see the shadow. Yeah. And how many times
that's everybody. That's like Michael Myers. That's anybody. They're creeping up the stairs.
It is.
I still think of that to this day for my own stairs, and it's just like, I don't know. I thought of that when I was watching this. I was like, man, I know it sounds so silly to think like, oh, look at this foresight with these guys with this shot, but seriously, look at the foresight of these guys with the shot that like they got the creepy fucking Count Orlok shadow going up the stairs. Like that's
and now you see that image and you immediately know Nosferatu, right? That's what I said before, when he's recognizable even in silhouette, like the all the great monsters are. Godzilla,
we've talked about that multiple times.
Godzilla, look at that silhouette, you know exactly who it is. And for like a true monster, to be truly iconic, like you can recognize it even in silhouette, and Count Orlok is definitely in that category.
I love the point that you made about the playing it to the rafters, like these guys used to stage productions or whatever else they've been doing, but that is really cool to point out that.
But Max Schreck knows how
Shrek is playing it close to the
subtle.
vest,
He's nuanced. He is. Of course, I mean, there are a lot of interpretations of Nosferatu as a metaphor. One of the more common ones is that he represents the plague. That's an easy one, since in the film he literally brings the plague to town with him. So that's a pretty easy interpretation. Remember, Nosferatu was released in 1922, just as the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was winding down. So the people who saw this film during its original release would have known exactly what he represented, this silent death who's come to town. He could also be a broader representation of death, the death brought by the Great War, which Murnau served in and Albin Grau served in. They were both veterans of World War I. So that's something else that would have hit very close to home to German audiences in 1922.
I mean, try to put yourself in that predicament. You talk about like the meeting the audience halfway, but I mean, imagine being in that context and then seeing something like this. You don't have the internet. You don't have, anything else to base this off of. It's the same as like, say, I don't know. I try to imagine when people saw Friedkin's The Exorcist,
right.
And you've grown up your whole life in this super religious household, and then like somebody just presents it on screen for you, and you've got no other basis except the legends you've been told to go off of.
So just before we move on, Justin, you mentioned when Murnau started that production company with Conrad Veidt. That triggered something for me, and I probably should have mentioned it when you initially mentioned Conrad Veidt. But Conrad Veidt, the actor, was also the inspiration for the Joker in the movie The Man Who Laughs. If you Google image like Conrad Veidt Joker, you will be presented with nightmare fuel.
It's an incredible piece of like makeup artistry.
Yes.
It really is.
Yeah, it really
it's
is.
really cool.
Yeah. So, anyways, that was just just a little aside there.
I've already mentioned a couple of further viewing choices of my own here. I mentioned Haxan and Vampire, Carl Theodor Dreyer's Vampire, but I think the other ones, if the obvious ones, I guess you would say, for if you wanted to watch something else that's more closely related to this film, I would say Werner Herzog's 1979 remake of Nosferatu, starring Klaus Kinski as Count Orlok, which is a very good film. Nice. Or I think we've already mentioned it once, but Shadow of the Vampire from 2000, which is a fictionalized account of the making of Nosferatu, which stars John Malkovich as F.W. Murnau. I think Cary Elwes, does he play Henrik Galeen? Is that who he's playing in it?
That does feel like, yeah.
I mean, Cary Elwes is in the Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
No, he's also in Shadow of the Vampire.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. Am I crazy? I'm not crazy, right? Oh no, Cary Elwes plays Wagner, the cameraman.
Oh, okay.
And
cool.
Udo Kier, the great Udo Kier, plays Albin Grau, and of course Willem Dafoe
as Count Orlok.
Of course, I mean, he barely needed any prosthetics for it.
he just showed up to set looking like that.
So
they had to tone him down for Spider-Man.
But in Shadow of the Vampire, basically it goes by that whole rumor that Max Schreck was an actual vampire. Yeah. It's a dark comedy. It's very funny and very clever. It's a really good movie. I would highly recommend checking it out. Do you guys have any other films that you would recommend for further viewing?
So for me, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for, but if we're going to stick with like vampire movies, I mean, and trying to stick specifically to Count Orlok over here. I mean, I already mentioned Salem's Lot, but I feel like Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot's pretty solid. We've discussed that one already.
Yeah, great movie.
Definitely Count Orlok inspired. There is this does not get enough credit, and I don't care what anybody says, but there is a film called, it's based off a comic, 30 Days of Night.
Yes.
And I actually
David Slade,
really
director of Twilight Eclipse.
I love that movie, and Arvin is a vampire in that movie and is certainly based off Nosferatu.
Oh yeah,
100%. He is. Yeah. And so I'd give that credit to. And I don't know. I mean, I think those would be the two I'll recommend right now.
30 Days of Night is so great. I actually got to meet the author, Steve Niles. Yeah, and could not be a nicer guy. And it was so funny I remember reading an interview with him, and the interviewer also went on to interview other horror comic writers, and the consensus was that when 30 Days of Night came out, they all just slapped their foreheads of like, why didn't I think of that? It's
certainly one of those ideas that you're like, why? How has this not happened?
Yeah. So for my pick, I went a little bit broader with my choice. This is 1994. The author of the book is also the credited screenwriter, with a body count of 56. Stan Winston based the look of the charred corpses on archival photographs of the victims of the Hiroshima bombing when he was sculpting the rough models. Any guesses?
I always 1994 trivia.
I know he does. It's Interview with the Vampire.
It is Interview with the Vampire. Yeah.
Good movie.
Yeah, I love that.
And by the way, if you have not watched the series season 1, it is good. It is legitimately pretty fucking good.
I found it. I'll probably be watching that here in the not too distant future. Yeah.
I love the movie. So as a person who loves the movie, who was hesitant to watch the series, I can say like, okay, the pretty series solid. It's like, okay, this could be better.
Yeah.
Like, if they play it out all the way, like, it's like, all right, they might win.
I enjoy when Tom Cruise is not the hero. And so I love him as Lestat. I think
I love him as that's why I love him as Frank T.J. Mackey in Magnolia, like
yeah,
or in Collateral, like as the villain. Like
yes,
good.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the
Guy's a pretty good
series
actor.
you definitely get more depth with like vampirism and
Nice.
Lestat not being a great dude.
No, he's not. He's not a great dude. Hot take from Gary. Thank you.
I'm just saying. I don't know. He said he enjoyed it more when Lestat's not the hero, and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, he's certainly in the
when
series.
Tom Cruise it plays a villain, not
Yeah.
necessarily. Yeah, I like.
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I'm on the same page now.
So, although Nosferatu was not a commercial success upon release, critical enthusiasm for the film helped to put F.W. Murnau on the map. And over the next 4 years, he made 7 more films, the 2 most significant of which are The Last Laugh, released in 1924, and Faust, released in 1926. When it was released in the U.S., The Last Laugh performed poorly at the box office, but it thrilled American filmmakers, including William Fox, who was the founder of the Fox Film Corporation, later known as 20th Century Fox.
Later known as Fox News.
Yeah, well, sort of. Yeah. But William Fox offered him a lucrative contract, and Murnau moved to Hollywood, where he was pretty much worshipped by others in the industry. Fox introduced him simply as the German genius. That's how he introduced him to people. Yeah, so Murnau was hot shit when he got to Hollywood. For his next feature, Murnau would be given a generous budget and complete creative control, which was highly unusual during this period of filmmaking in Hollywood. And he set to work on Sunrise, which was a huge hit with the critics. Robert Sherwood, writing for Life magazine when this movie came out, he said, quote, "The title of world's greatest director is applied to F.W. Murnau. Sunrise, to my mind, is the most important picture in the history of the movies." Granted, the history at the time was like 30 years, but still, it's still high praise.
Yeah.
Sunrise would go on to win the Academy Award for Unique and Artistic Picture, which is something that doesn't exist anymore, but Unique and Artistic Picture at the first ever Academy Awards. So so this movie won an award at the first ever Academy Awards. It also won an award for Best Actress and Best Cinematography, and was nominated for several other awards. So it was like the I don't know, the Titanic of I don't know. That's a bad analogy, but it was a big deal. What I'm saying. But unfortunately, audiences kind of stayed away.
The Dream
from
Girls of its time.
It was the Dream Girls of its time. But audiences stayed away. It did not do great at the box office. And although he would make several more films, Murnau would never again be given the budget and artistic control that he had received on Sunrise. He made 2 other films for Fox before breaking his contract. His final film, which was made after that contract was broken, was Taboo, the Story of the South Seas. And that was a collaboration with the documentary filmmaker Robert Flaherty, who was well known as the director of Nanook of the North. Murnau, he used all the savings and earnings that he'd made in Hollywood to independently produce Taboo. And then at the last minute, Paramount saw an assembly cut of Taboo, and they liked it so much that they offered Murnau a 10-year contract with the studio. Wow. Murnau was ecstatic, and he began planning out his next series of films, but unfortunately, his story does not have a Hollywood happy ending. The New York premiere of Taboo was planned for March 18th, 1931. F.W. Murnau died from injuries sustained in a car crash on March 11th, exactly 1 week before his final film's premiere.
That's rough. I only have 2 fun points about that. One,
a fun fact about him dying is fun fact. Is this fun?
I don't know if fun fact's the greatest point.
Maybe facts. We'll just call them facts.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes if you search Taboo on the internet, you're gonna get like a totally different kind of thing. Like it's a different kind of porn.
What?
Search Taboo, the Story of the South Seas.
Taboo, the Story of the South Seas. But 3 weeks prior to this incident where Murnau died, I should point out, is the February 1931 premiere of Universal's Dracula.
Yep. So he saw it.
Wow.
He saw it happen at least. So
he did. I wonder what he thought about it.
I do. That's kind of what I was thinking. Is like,
yeah.
I was gonna say while he was riding around his car, does he think about Dracula? Maybe too much.
Oh no.
Oh, Murnau. No, it is sad to see that like this guy was apparently. It is a weird thing that I haven't seen Sunrise, to be honest with you, but it is interesting that like they're praising him as this important person and the most important picture in the history of movies and that sort of thing. Like that he actually did achieve that status at a certain point. It's I don't know. It's crazy. Hollywood's such a fickle bitch.
And he was on the cusp of doing even more. I mean, imagine if he had made those movies for 10 years with Paramount, working in the sound era, what he could have achieved. Because he's a great director. He really is. He's got a great vision.
How old was he when he died?
He's in his early 40s, I believe.
Oh yeah, he could have knocked out another decade of films.
He was pretty young.
Jeez.
Well, over the years, Nosferatu would go on to be appreciated as one of the most important films of all time, and there were so many factors working against its survival. The very fact that we can watch the film now, over 100 years after its release, is kind of miraculous, because it's estimated that only about 20% of the films from the silent era survived, often due to just general lack of film preservation techniques, and even more often due to the flammable and explosive nature of the silver nitrate film that these movies were shot on. I mean, silver nitrate is highly flammable. Todd, at our live show, you brought up Inglourious Bastards. If you've seen Inglourious Bastards, the reason that Shoshana is able to so succinctly burn down that theater is because she lights the film on fire, because that film silver nitrate is highly flammable. It's very dangerous. So any silent film surviving is improbable. And then when you factor in a court order for the film to actually be burned up and destroyed, well, I mean, Nosferatu shouldn't exist. We should not have access to it.
Yeah.
But like the undead, it has risen again and again to horrify new generations of movie lovers.
I'll be honest, I was surprised at our live event when you asked who had never seen it. I was like, oh, we're probably going to get 2 or 3. It was a lot. It was most of the room.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in that room we had a lot of people who were younger than us, people in their early mid-20s.
I don't think I was surprised. I was like, I think these people are here for just the experience, and but I love that they were open to it. And God, if I don't know, the reaction in that room was a lot of fun watching it with people.
People were getting hyped over it. Like, it was fun. People were very much into it. People were really into it, which just proves that just because it's an old silent movie and a black and white, vampire movie, it doesn't mean that it has to be boring. Just like I said before, meet it halfway. That's all you got to do. Yeah. Right. So earlier I quoted Roger Ebert's review, but I'm going to quote it again here because he sums up Nosferatu better than I ever could. He says, Nosferatu remains effective. It doesn't scare us, but it haunts us. It shows us not that vampires can jump out of shadows, but that evil can grow there, nourished on death. In a sense, Murnau's film is about all the things we worry about at 3 a.m, cancer, war, disease, madness. Then he concludes his review saying, Nosferatu is more effective for being silent. It is commonplace to say that silent films are more dreamlike, but what does that mean? In Nosferatu, it means that the characters are confronted with alarming images and denied the freedom to talk them away. There is not repartee in nightmares. Human speech dissipates the shadows and makes a room seem normal. Those things that live only at night do not need to talk, for their victims are asleep, waiting.
Ooh, nailed it.
Isn't that fucking good?
Yeah.
Roger Ebert was a good writer, right?
No, Roger Ebert is just good. And props to Roger Ebert. Ebert was famous for a reason. I will just say, if I may, that also fucking Count Orlok waiting on the other side of the door when you open it, or sitting across town staring at you through a window. Like, there were just legitimately creepy images unnerving. Unnerving things that you picture, in the back of your mind are creepy, and you can't quite place it, and then they put it on screen, and you're like, that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life.
Exactly.
Now I'm going to think about when I'm standing in my window, is there some fucking person standing? Yeah, exactly. It's just I wish people could have seen that weird rat thing you just did to the Zoom video.
That was my Count Orlok impression. My silent Count Orlok impression.
It was great.
Nice.
I'm gonna need Todd to make a GIF of Justin Bishop doing the Count Orlok to the window.
Oh man, if only I had the buck teeth, but I don't.
There is the intellectual way of viewing this, and there is also, hey, by the way, they did some really creepy shots that are going to be repeated for 100 years,
again and again, and 100 more.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun, guys. This was a fun time. This is the first time we've done a movie that's quite this old. I would love to do more, like old classic horror genre films. I mean, and we absolutely will. Not our next series. Our next series is going to be very modern, but we'll announce that later on. But now, we next week, or next episode, I should say, we are doing a Cinema Shock Roulette. We're not gonna deprive our listeners of a roulette episode just because we decided to do a simple little standalone film. So we're gonna do a roulette episode. And
can I open the envelope?
Well, it's a spin of the wheel.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's
Don't
right.
we
Yeah,
do that
we
in
do.
a
We do.
bonus
That's what this big wheel. Yeah, we're gonna just do it on this episode. We're not gonna worry about the bonus episode thing.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think this big wheel here is for, Todd? You just think I brought this in for
yeah,
shits and giggles?
no, you're right. I forgot about the wheel. Yeah.
Rub on it.
All right, Todd, spin the
Rub
wheel.
your face against it.
Spin it with your face.
Wheel
All right,
is
here we
made
go.
of my penis.
Always comes back to the penis with Gary. This is it's a Freudian thing. I guarantee it.
No, I have to talk up my penis because it's not existent if I don't.
Did you spin the wheel, Todd? I wasn't paying attention.
I did.
He
yeah.
did.
Oh,
He
wait,
spun it.
It made
what
the
did it
noise
land
and
on?
everything.
How could you not hear the wheel, Justin?
I'll spin it
It
again.
clearly
Hang on.
sounded
again.
like the sound effect that you just made.
Spin it again. I wasn't paying attention.
Here we go.
All right, so looks like we're sticking with spooky season, at least for one more episode, because we are talking about another horror film from 1977, a Japanese horror film. So not just a horror film, but a foreign film, which I'm sure is going to lead to some fun. Somebody needs an app reviews. It's a movie from 1977 called Hausu, or House. It is. Have you guys seen this movie?
No. I'm looking
I
forward to it.
feel
though.
like I saw this with you somewhere.
That sounds like
forever ago.
This is the type of movie that I like to show to people. So this is one of those movies.
I feel like I saw this because we were at your townhome with John or something.
Maybe, yeah.
And then I was like, what is this?
It is wild as hell. It is. If you have never seen Hausu, it is unlike anything you've ever seen. It's a Japanese ghost story, but it is not like modern J horror stuff in any way whatsoever. It is a wholly unique film that you honestly can't compare to anything else. It is a roller coaster ride of a film. So I'm very excited to dig into the history of this film because I don't know a lot about the creation of it. So I'm excited to educate myself and then pass that knowledge on to our listeners.
Yay.
Exciting.
So join us in our next episode. We'll be talking about Hausu. I guess that's all we got for
It's
this
also
week, though, guys.
it also pops
Happy
up
Halloween.
when you search
Yeah.
it. It comes up as House 1977.
Yeah. House. Well, I want to make sure I say Hausu so people don't think it's House like the 80s horror movie, which is also a great movie, but that's not the one we're talking about.
Right.
So, all right. So Hausu next week. That's all we got for this episode. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Yay.
Where can y'all be found on the internet for our listeners?
I am at This Is Gary Horde on all the social medias. I have a wrestling podcast at TIPW Show on all the socials. And I am part of the National Wrestling Alliance. It's at NWA on everything. So if you want to get into some wrestling, that's where you do that.
And I'm working my way through the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for now on my show, Computer Resume Podcast, available now wherever you get your podcasts and on all the socials at Computer Resume. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
How long does that joke go on? I'm just curious.
Listen, they burned me once, man. You know,
Because that movie has like come and gone.
Oh,
it was a great movie, by the way.
The movie's fun. The movie's fun. I'm talking, it's the company. So it's, us third party people are once bitten, twice shy. So
wow. We just took this reference back even further. I like that.
Well, you can find me at Justin_Bishop on Instagram and Letterboxd. The show is at cinema_shop. You can find it pretty much everywhere under that. You can also find all of our episodes as well as links to our Discord channel, our merch, our t-shirts, all that stuff at cinemashock.net. Like, rate, review, and share us any way that you know how with anyone that you know. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
It's a silent. Yeah,
I get it. I see what you're doing, Todd.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
What our listeners couldn't see was the inner title that popped up and said Johnny Hester.
Yeah.